So a few of you had asked me about the amendment to the Ali Act. I've skimmed through the thing. I didn't pay that much attention to everything because I guess I'll worry about it more should this thing become actually law. But even as I skim through this thing, there seems to be plenty to worry about as things stand. Now, for the longest, boxing fans, pundits have talked about how the Ali Act is toothless, right? Because there's no central authority enforcing some of the violations against it that are currently happening in boxing. Like, for example, the fact that there seems to be a whole bunch of conflict of interest, like managers also promoting or promoters also managing fighters, for example. And while that's true, a fighter could always sue, for example, the promoter, and using the Ali Act, he could take him to court and, win a lot of money, have damages paid if the promoter or whoever it is that they're suing doesn't comply with the Ali Act. So while there's no central authority enforcing the Ali Act all across the board, it's not actually toothless, because if you actually have the balls or the teeth to go after somebody that's violating the act, the law's on your side. And plenty of fighters have used the Ali Act to, for example, like Crawford versus Top Rank, to find out how much money he's actually bringing in when it comes to his pay-per-views or shows or whatever, and that gives him the power to negotiate any other potential contract, for example. Now, this addendum, if you will, or amendment to the Ali Act isn't going to get rid of the Ali Act, but it's just going to give the promoters to create a legal entity called a UBO, or Universal, I think, Boxing Promotion, or something along the line. So think basically the UFC, or that exact thing that a lot of UFC fighters are obviously against, and praise the Ali Act for existing in opposition to an entity such as the UFC, and wishing they had something like that protecting them, where they could, be better off financially and just overall. So if the Ali Act doesn't have any teeth, or if there's problems because it's not being enforced, and we all agreed on that, or people that cared about law, ethics, and boxing, things of that nature, then passing this amendment is not giving it any more teeth, right? It's making it worse. It's creating a milieu where quite possibly all other promoters will be motivated, incentivized, forced to become UBOs, perhaps. I'm not sure. So while it wouldn't get rid of the Ali Act officially, for all intents and purposes, it might, because why would a promoter have to deal with all these legal restraints, constraints, things that aren't necessarily in his favor, when he could just declare himself a UBO and essentially, for all intents and purposes, do away with not have to abide by the Ali Act, which will, by then will be completely toothless and just a worthless piece of paper. So, again, this hasn't passed yet. We'll see what happens. But it's not a good thing for fighters, and it's not a good thing for boxing, because, well, again, so much as I complain about people throwing that phrase out there, quote unquote, good for boxing, not defining it, let me not be a hypocrite. Depending on what you believe is good for boxing, and my stance has always been, and to this day remains, very simple. The best versus the best at their best. And obviously with TKO, Turki Alalshikh, coming into boxing, and R.E. Emanuel spilling the beans on this, the Ali Act going away. That is who wants this thing to pass, and that's because they want to bring the UFC model to boxing. I hope everybody understands that. And on the one hand, if Turki Alalshikh and the Saudi government were able to get their greedy fingers, their claws in every bit of the global boxing scene, yeah, and whether that's by affiliated companies, I'm basically talking about a fighter pipeline where, you know, a kid in the slums of the Philippines has a chance to become the next Manny Pacquiao, basically. So if they could create a pipeline, and that would take a lot of subsidiaries all over the world being affiliated with TKO Holdings, having some type of legal contract with them, and providing some sort of proving ground pipeline through which global talent could find their way into this one huge entity that is global boxing, right? Total and utter globalization of boxing, which, you know, if they could somehow achieve this, in theory, that would be great, right? Because then presumably anybody would have an equal chance to get to the top, right? There would be truly global competition where everybody fights everybody, in a sense. And we could draw from talent pools from all over the world. But something like that would be such a massive undertaking. I just don't see that happening. And I don't think they have enough money or brain power to be able to get this done. I mean, perhaps if they train some incredible AI models and employ them to do that, then maybe so. But, you know, Turkey, so much as he seemed to be a fan of AI, has gotten rid of the AI judge for some odd reason. The AI wasn't corrupt enough for him? That's my opinion. Anyway, so what I think this is more likely to result in is more of the same, what we have in boxing. So, more belts, right? It'll create the ability for any promoter out there to create his own belt. And unless, and they seem to want to do that, there's been some chatter of Turki Alalshikh buying out all these promoters, like what they did in golf, for example, bought out their, or merged with their biggest competition after basically destroying them, poaching their golfers and things of that nature. This could be, it could be a good thing, right? Anyone who tells you that this is great for boxing or it's bad for boxing, they're just being dishonest. They're not being honest with themselves, because you can't know where this is going to go unless you know what their plans are. And I guarantee you these people have plan A, plan B, C, D, all these contingencies. They don't even know where this is going to go, right? This will be a lot of ruthless business practices looking to gobble up, push out, destroy your competition so you could buy everybody out, or as many as you can, so that you could become, you know, that one ring to rule them all. And if they could somehow do that, where they could merge all these promoters with the talent pipelines that all these promotion companies already utilize, then theoretically that would be a good thing. But I think it's more likely that they're just going to create, this will force, you know, because in order to stay in business with these, to compete with these people, you're going to have to do what they do, I think. So you're going to see all these UBOs, each one of them with their own belt. And unlike what's happening today, which so much as we complain about it, you know, unifications do happen. Fighters from different promotions do manage to find ways to fight one another, if not always, sometimes. If you have a global boxing scene with nothing but UBOs with their own belts, what are the chances that they're going to cross promote, especially if there's one that's more powerful than the rest of them, like the UFC, right? And it could claim to be the flagship, if you will, of MMA or boxing, like the UFC does, and the fan buys it, the majority of boxing fans buy that and support that, then there's not going to be any cross-promoting going on. Fighters are going to have to leave, let's say, Top Rank, Golden Boy, and come cross the street, so to speak, into Turkey's TKO Holding, whatever you want to call it, UBO, right? So this is going to create more belts, and there's probably going to be less cross-promotional fights happening. That's more likely to happen. And I do understand that fighters eventually make their way to the UFC from some of these other promotions when their contracts run out and they do get to compete. Yeah, okay, fair enough, but like, wouldn't it be better if they were able to compete with one another when they're, let's say, both in their prime or on the come up, or there shouldn't be, if you want to see the best versus the best and truly want to know who the best is, maybe there shouldn't be any restrictions as to who fights, or the possibility of anybody fighting anybody should at the very least exist like it does today. And that's not me saying that it's easy to make some of these fights, because we all know it's not, but the possibility is there. If you have a whole bunch of, if you have Strikeforce, I don't even know like what's out there, but this is what I do know. UFC, Strikeforce, Bellator, and whatever else, right? I know Pride doesn't exist, but let's just use that as an example. All these different promotions, they don't all fight each other, right? And okay, even if you could get the best guy from this promotion to finally cross over and even whoop ass in the flagship premier promotion of them all, well, styles make fights, right? Like, just because he is able to beat the best guy in the UFC, that doesn't mean he would have beaten the best guy at Strikeforce, and that guy's not competing. So this isn't, you're gonna have to literally cross the street for these fights to happen, and by the time you cross the street, anyway, I'm sure you get the point. So if you want to see the best versus the best at their best, then you would want Turkey to be able to control basically the entire global boxing scene. And I just don't see that happening. There's just not enough brain power or resources in any one group to be able to do that. And it's not even good for their business, because it's too much work, too much of an investment. And why do they need to do that when all they have to do is to brainwash the fan and make them believe that they're the only game in town? That's all they got to do, like the UFC, right? So I think that's the direction they're going to go in. And, it's going to make some people happy, I guess. But if you're really into, again, the best versus the best at their best, then this is not for you. Now, whatever ultimately happens, and nobody knows, because A, this shit has to pass first, and B, TKO Holdings has to be successful within this model for other promoters to try to follow suit. So it's completely unpredictable, right? I could see this going well enough, improving boxing, and I could see this going wrong and making boxing worse. I already defined what boxing being good means, so stick with me. In my opinion, it's not good for boxing. Even if we're somehow able to get rid of corruption, fix fights, and all the bullshit that we're dealing with right now, right? Even if we just assume that everyone's intentions are pure and they're all good people. I still think this wouldn't be good for boxing, because I believe in the spirit of competition and free markets. Well, not completely free, but some sort of semblance of free market capitalism when it comes to the sport of boxing. Competition's good, basically, right? Competition is good for business. If there's no competition and you have a monopoly, then all you got to do is just convince the people again that you're the best thing since sliced bread, and that's it. All the dupes will follow and they'll be happy with that, right? You don't actually have to be the best thing since sliced bread, so long as you have the hearts and minds of the people and their money, most importantly. And that's a lot easier to do today with social media than to actually create, again, a global boxing scene where, in theory, anybody has a fair shot at becoming, the man, a world champion. So this will, I hope I'm wrong, but I think this will completely destroy, for the purists in us, this will destroy the concept of a world champion. It's bad as it is already. At least we've gotten to a point where people understand lineal or undisputed, which a lot of the times is one and the same. Like, we could point to the man in the division. As bad as it is, and all the divisions right now don't have the champion, if this UBO thing goes into effect full force, forget about it. There's the UFC of boxing is going to call their guy the world champion or whatever, but that's like, Chicago Bulls saying they're world champions in basketball. And again, that's worked well for Chicago Bulls fans or North American basketball fans, but you look at all these Slavs coming into the league, kind of like boxing, right? And doing well, maybe arguably being some of the best, if not the best, right? Unathletic as some of them may be, I mean, so what, right? It's hard to claim that, the NBA champion is the champion of the world, but a lot of people have historically bought that, and I don't see why it would be any different when it comes to boxing. So, pick your poison, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a fan of this. I hope it doesn't pass. And I've never said this about a boxing promotion, not even the PBC, which I criticized a lot, but I hope Turkey and his enterprise fails. I really do, because I don't think they're good people, and this is the second part of my video, and I don't think their intentions are good, okay? Because the reason why Saudis have gone into golf and football and whatever else and boxing now is not to give you what you want, boxing fan. I know, shocker, right? That's not their primary motivation. Now, obviously, in order to sell themselves to you, they're going to have to throw you a bone, and I see a whole bunch of fools have fallen for the grift, and they're groveling to His Excellency and all this other nonsense. Because, money's king, I guess, so it is what it is. But the reason why Saudis are in boxing is not to give you what you want, it's to convince you, and the Crawford Canelo fight is a perfect analogy, right? To convince you that the shit you never thought you wanted is what you want, right? They're going to attempt to sell ice to the Eskimos, basically, right? Let's not get into Edward Bernays and his theories, right? But another analogy, if you will. How long have we been making clothes as people? Let's say 6,000 years? I don't know, thousands of years, right? Where we've had like designated tailors, if you will, or people who made clothes, right? Thousands and thousands of years, and it never occurred to us to put print, right? Letters, font, script on any of them, right? It never occurred to us. And now you can hardly buy an article of clothing that doesn't have a brand name, a stamp, or a logo, or some kind of something that communicates a certain message, right? You paid for this shit, but I own you. So, right, nobody was asking for Canelo Crawford. Canelo said he's too small. Crawford said he's too big. And now it's the biggest fight in boxing somehow, even though both of these guys are past their prime. And Crawford looked like shit in his last fight. And Canelo's what did he throw, 120 punches in his last fight? And his fights have been boring for the most part, even if you believe they're real. But this is like the best fight in boxing or something. And they bought it. So, Turkey's a con man, and he knows he could sell these dupes anything, and because he owns the journalists, he owns the press. He bought the Ring magazine, and everyone's groveling for that press pass, whatever kickback, whores at the hotel, whatever it is that convinces these people to say what Turkey wants them to say. They're just his mouthpieces. And if there's no one who stands in opposition to this, then the dupe, the casual, whatever you want to call him, the hardcore boxing fan, who doesn't think for himself, will just gobble this shit up. Just like Canelo and Crawford, they gobbled it up. This fucking clown is selling snow to the Eskimos, and they're telling him how delicious that shit is. But let's give him some credit. He gave us some fights that seemed like they were on this, on the horizon, and that's where they were going to stay. And he brought that into focus and gave it to us. So he gets credit, right? I've given credit to him, but that's like a shoe boutique owner who just opens up his store in a neighborhood and he sells his $300, retail pair Italian leather shoes for $150 just to get everybody's foot in the door, right? He loses money initially in order to hopefully gain a regular, right? A casual. So I've never been fooled by that, and that's also because what was the first, or at least the first big Riyadh season boxing card, right? It wasn't Tom and Jerry, right? It was Mickey Mouse. Fury Ngannou, and then we got AJ Ngannou. Now he's talking about Jake Paul getting involved. He's had these grand ideas about Gervonta Davis, Jake Paul, right? Bivol, Opetaya, all these fights, Mickey Mouse fights that I've talked about. Like, in order to convince someone like Bivol, who already followed the script in the Canelo fight, to fight someone like Opetaya, right? You're going to have to convince both guys. Well, Bivol could go 100%, but you're going to have to convince Bivol and Opetaya that Opetaya is going to play patty cake. Okay? That's just what it is. So Turkey, Saudi Arabia did not come to boxing to give you what you want. They came into boxing in order to wean their country off oil revenues, okay, to have another revenue stream. So, and this should have been understood from the very get-go, because not only was this explained to all of us, it's just the first rule of business: make money, right? And in order for an entity such as Saudi Arabia, I don't know what their GDP is, but I'm sure it's in the billions, right? If not a trillion. Right? In order for them to get anything significant insofar as revenues from boxing, they're gonna have to create huge shows. Okay? So it's not gonna be, perfect example, Joe Parker versus Usyk. It's gonna be Fury Usyk 3, 4, 5, until the people put their fucking foot down and say no. And because it's mostly drunkards who don't know anything about boxing and always pretend like they do, who will always foot the bill for these Mickey Mouse fights, right? We're going to get Mickey Mouse fights. Not only that, but we're going to get a whole bunch of fake, rigged sparring sessions, WWE style, because, well, they're too fucking drunk to notice, to realize what's going on. Okay? So there is, and I've talked about this, I've always maintained this, there is virtue insofar as you and I hate using this term, but fans, boxing fans, real boxing fans, best versus the best at their best. In order for us to get what we want, right, you actually got to get money, all this money out of boxing. I'm not saying fighters shouldn't get paid what they merit to get paid, but I mean, how are you going to have a guy on some little show getting paid, $500 for a 10 rounder, and someone like Usyk getting 100 million for 12. Like, the disparity there is just incredible, right? These top level guys shouldn't be getting that much money, and the lower level guys should be getting more. So much as we've criticized, let's say Al Heyman for fucking up the market by overpaying these fighters and creating a non-sustainable model, I mean, how come Turkey escapes this criticism, right? Paying these guys the types of money they don't even warrant. What do you think he's doing? Clearly he's looking to push out other promoters out the game, or force them to sell, force them to merge, right? Like, when you look at the greatest card ever, and just Turkey's cards in general, where especially that one, where any one of those fights on that card could have been a main event in and of itself, right? And he's had many cards where, let's say, the top 3, top 2 fights could have been a main event onto themselves, right? And so what does that mean? So if you have a card that's potentially 6 main events, that's 6 different cards, 6 different weeks, right? 2 in the States, 2 in England, let's say 1 in Japan and 1 in Mexico, whatever, with a supporting cast, right? Prospects, contenders, less known guys that are on the come up and need the exposure. You have what every promoter needs, right? They use their top level guys to build everybody else to have a sustainable growth model and to build themselves and stay in business, right? So what Turkey's been doing is he's been luring these promoters in by giving them a shit ton of money, while at the same time convincing them to engage in this business practice that's bad for their business. I mean, look at what's happening at Top Rank. Look at what's happening to the PBC. And I know it's not just Turkey destroying them, right? He's kicking a dead horse, or stabbing a guy that's already perhaps bleeding to death on the ground anyway, right? But hey, he's contributing to it. What he's trying to do is to destroy his competition. He's going to pay these guys so much money. He's going to poach a lot of these fighters. These fighters are not going to want to take fights with these regular promoters, because how do you go, say you're Usyk, from whatever it is he made, right, 50, 70, $100 million in his last fight, to fighting Joe Parker on Queensberry for, what, $4 million? You're just not going to do that, right? So what he's doing is he's creating an unsustainable kind of an environment that rival promoters can survive in. Saudis can, because they got all this oil money and they're investing. They could. It's a war of attrition that they're likely to. They're the obvious winner if promoters go along with this and allow this war to go on, because it pays their bills, right? They're basically just selling out their business, destroying their businesses. It'll come to a point where they'll have to sell or just go bankrupt, right? They're going to have to merge. So these Saudis are fucking ruthless, okay? And they're not here to give you what you want. I don't know what person, like, I'm sorry, I know I get on my high horse and shit, but it just frustrates me. How dumb do people have to be to think that? And this idea of like sports washing, yeah, I get it. It works on a certain level with like educated people, except it doesn't because they call it out, right? So it does. This idea of sports washing never made much sense to me, because those who know, they know, and you can't sports wash human rights abuses, murder, dismembering of journalists, this sort of thing. You can't sports wash that to people who care. And the people who don't care, they don't know anything about this, because they think Uncle Turkey is here to kiss them on their ass, when he's a complete and utter tyrant from a royal family that are complete and utter authoritarians. They look at you as scum, okay? You're here to serve them. They are the patrons. They are the masters. We are slaves. Do you not know what culture these people come from? What culture they cultivate in their own country? This is who they are. They're not here to give you anything. They're here to enslave you, take your shit, enslave your mind, and take your fucking money. They're here to sell ice to the Eskimo and have the fucking Eskimo thank them for it. That's what they're here for. They're not here to give us the best versus the best. They're here to make the biggest, most profitable fights. And what is that? What does that look like? Well, fucking Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis, okay? Usyk, Fury, 3, 4, 5, till the dupes get tired of paying for this shit, okay? This is all these fucking freak shows between, and because there might not be enough popular enough fighters in any one division, what they're gonna want to do, and he's already been dropping these hints, they're gonna mix and match guys not based on what weight class they're in, but how popular they are. So you're gonna have 40, 50 pound disparity freak shows that you will have to obviously fix. It's gonna be the WWE on fucking steroids in boxing. Of course it is, because that's going to make the most money. At least that's what I see. They're not here to give you what you want. They're here to convince you that what you want is that which makes them the most money. I hope this shit fails, man. I really do.